So I received the Pimax Crystal 2 days ago. This is a loan unit that Pimax sent me for a period of 6 months to test out, give some impressions on, make some content on, and that's what I plan on doing. And I'll be getting pretty deep into it over the next 6 months. Of course, I'll be trying it out with a lot of stuff, especially the kind of games and experiences that I enjoy playing. Probably mainly things like Elite Dangerous, Microsoft Flight Simulator, racing sims, but I'll also probably jump in briefly to some other types of games as well, of course, just to give some idea of that. So I'm showing some footage of me playing Elite Dangerous in the Pimax Crystal yesterday. I recorded this, and this was one of the first experiences I went into. I wanted to try Elite Dangerous. It's one of my favourite games, so I wanted to see what that game looked like in the Pimax Crystal. And so let's get into it then. Let's start off with some good points. First of all, I mean, the obvious thing to say is the display. It is absolutely the clearest, sharpest display that I've ever seen in VR. It's got a very high resolution of 2880 by 2880 per eye, and you can obviously have to manage the resolution scaling. I'm playing in Steam VR, so I actually lowered resolution scaling down in order to get it running good enough on my system. I'm running a RTX 3080, which you probably don't really want to go too much lower than that in terms of GPU for this headset. Although, even then, you can obviously still continue to lower resolution scaling and stuff like that to get your performance up. And it still looks absolutely fantastic. So I've experimented with resolution scaling, which I'll get into a little bit more when I dive into some more games and experiences which demand me to optimize performance a bit more. But actually, in this footage that I'm showing here now, I actually lowered it down to 50% resolution scaling in Steam VR, which was still giving it a resolution of over 3000 by 3000 per eye, and it still looks fantastic. This is one of the advantages as well. By having this high resolution display, you can still lower resolution scaling in order to manage your performance, but it still looks fantastic. Even if the resolution scaling is lower, the fact that there's no screen door, there's no perceivable pixels and things like that is fantastic. And I say no perceivable pixels, we'll get into that again in another video, because there you can still see the pixels if you really look for them. But again, this is the highest resolution display I think I've used. I did briefly try the Vario Aero, and I did have some issues with the binocular overlap on that particular headset, although the display was absolutely fantastic too. So actually, just touching on the binocular overlap, in the Pimax Crystal, it's incredibly good as well. There's very large amount of binocular overlap. At least that's the way it feels. And I need to do some measurements on that. I need to download some software which will enable me to do that. But yeah, the display is the first thing that will pop out at you, and the brightness and the colours are fantastic. It's got a mini LED LCD display which allows for local dimming. Now, I need to look into that a little bit more as well. It's still very early days, but I can say Elite Dangerous looked incredible in this headset. There was also no distortion. Now, this is something I'm very sensitive to, and something that actually pops out at me at a lot of other Pimax headsets. The 5K Plus, which I tried many years ago, I really didn't like because of the distortion, the peripheral distortion on the edges. The 8KX was much better. It had better distortion profiles by that stage, but there was definitely still distortion on the 8KX for me, and it was still a distraction, but basically about on the edge of being acceptable to me. I was okay with it in that headset, and I did enjoy the 8KX. The Pimax Crystal, obviously it's got a smaller field of view. It's still large, and I'd say it is more or less about what a Valve Index field of view is. But that will vary from person to person, and for some people they might find that it's actually smaller than Valve Index field of view, some it might seem larger. Again, this is very subjective. All of this stuff is subjective, and that's what you need to keep in mind when looking at this headset and looking at any VR headset. It's the same for everybody. All of these things are subjective. Now, I've seen some people say that they do notice distortion in the Pimax Crystal. I've also seen people say that the field of view is actually smaller than they were expecting. But these are subjective values, so I can only give honest opinions on what I see when I look through this headset. And as I'll just reiterate, the field of view is roughly the same as a Valve Index, and I can't see any distortion at all along the edges. So it's something I'm really sensitive to, and it's something I do look out for. So for me, there's no distortion. One of the other main good points of this headset is the audio solution. It's an off-ear audio solution, very similar to the Valve Index, and honestly, I'm surprised by how good this audio is as well. I'm not sure if I would quite put it up to the level of a Valve Index audio, but if it's not, it's very close, and certainly good enough for me. So that was actually a bit of a surprise. I wasn't expecting the audio to be quite as good as that. The other thing is this comes with inside-out tracking with motion controllers as well, and I've only very briefly gone into this, so I'll need to test this out a little bit more, but for me the tracking was fine. The tracking volume could perhaps be slightly larger, but I didn't have time to really test it too thoroughly, so that's something I'll get into in the next few weeks, I guess. I'll test that a little bit more, but for the most part I would say the tracking is acceptable on the controllers. I didn't really have too many problems, honestly, but I don't want to say too much on that at this stage. The cable as well, it's tethered to the PC, and there's no standalone mode at the moment, although I think that will be enabled at some point, but we'll see about that. I can't comment on that part. But the cable itself is very light and thin, so I like that aspect of it as well. And also the setup process for this headset was incredibly easy. It was literal seconds. So I downloaded the Pimax Play software and just connected the headset up, turned it on, and it literally detected immediately. I went in and I was there. There was absolutely no issues with setup, which is something I was anticipating actually, because I'd heard from other people that the software setup and getting the Pimax to be recognised by the computer is sometimes a bit of a hassle. But I think they've improved the software from that point of view quite a bit. At least, in my experience, I can't say I had any issues at all. I'm just trying to think if there was literally anything in terms of the Pimax software or the setup process itself, and I can't think of anything at all that caused me any problems. The only issue I had was actually with Steam VR, nothing to do with Pimax. The Pimax module in Steam VR had been deactivated on my PC from months ago, so I had a little bit of sorting out to do from that point of view, but that's nothing to do with the setup of the Pimax itself, really. So let's get into a few of the bad things which are immediately jumping out to me, and the obvious one, and the one which is almost impossible to ignore, is the size and the weight of the headset. It's very bulky, it's large, and it's quite heavy as well. So I think that's important to say. Now, I can't say it's completely uncomfortable or anything like that when I'm wearing it, but it does take a little bit of adjustment in order to get in the right position on my head. And I've only played for a maximum of around 45 minutes or so in it so far. And although I could feel the weight, and it's always better if you can't have that large bulky thing on your head, then I can't honestly say that I felt uncomfortable at the end of that 45 minutes. I'm going to jump into some longer play sessions at some point in the future, of course, so I'll report back on that, but there's no getting away from the fact that this is a large headset, and I think some people will find it uncomfortable. There's also the issue with the battery. Now, for anybody who doesn't know, even when it's tethered to a PC, it relies on a battery for power, which I believe they've quoted as saying it will last around 6 hours. And this is not a good thing in my opinion, but it's a solution they've got at the moment in order to power the headset. Now, I think they're working on something else in order to provide an extra source of power, but I've got 2 batteries with the Pimax Crystal, so I can alternate them. I've never been in a situation yet where I've not been able to play the headset, because I do alternate the batteries, and also my play sessions have not really been long enough to run it down completely or anything like that. So I can't say I like the fact it's got a battery and it does run down even when you're tethered to a PC, but at the same time it honestly hasn't really caused me any problems, but it's something to keep in mind with this headset. And also the actual Steam VR setup, there was a little bit of hassle with the room setup more than anything else. So as I mentioned before, the actual initial setup of getting the headset to connect and all these kinds of things was no issue, but when I went into Steam VR Home, I found that the floor level was wrong, and I had to do the floor fix. I use FPS VR in order to put a controller on the floor and then correct the floor level, but it's just like the room scale setup, the play area setup in the Pimax Play software just seems a bit finicky. It doesn't really seem designed for inside out tracked headsets at the moment. It keeps asking you to put your headset in the view of base stations and things like that, so I think there's still some tweaking in terms of the software from that point of view in order to get the play area set up correctly. So that's another thing, but again, these are all very first impressions, and I need to dive into all of this a little bit more and get my head around some of these little nuances with the software and with the headset itself. So just to finish up, as I mentioned, this footage that I'm showing here is me playing Elite Dangerous, and I've got to say this looked incredible in the headset. It really did. Now, of course, you're wearing this bulky headset, it's heavy, but the experience when you're in there and you're just enjoying flying around space, it's there's something to be said for this headset. I really enjoyed my time yesterday in Elite Dangerous, and I'm going to be playing a lot more of that game. But yeah, there's plenty more to get into with this, but that's just a few of my first impressions anyway. So thank you very much for watching and listening, and stay tuned on the channel. I plan quite a lot of videos on the Pimax Crystal, of course, and once I've had it for longer than 2 days, I'll be able to give some more rounded thoughts, I would say. But the takeaways are, the display is fantastic. I didn't have distortion at all. The audio is fantastic. Setup was a breeze. The headset is heavy, it's bulky, and also the fact it's got that battery is a bit of a pain. So those are the things that are just jumping out at me at the moment anyway, but we'll see how we go with it. So once again, thank you for watching and listening, and I'll see you next time.